The silence in Pharaoh's court was heavy, broken only by the echoes of Moses' words. "Let my people go." The demand, bold and uncompromising, rang through the halls like thunder. Pharaoh, son of the gods, raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. His voice dripped with mockery as he replied, "Who is the Lord that I should obey him and let Israel go? I do not know the Lord, and I will not let Israel go." And with that, the confrontation began, not between two men but between heaven and empire. Pharaoh rejected the command. Instead of releasing the Israelites, he increased their burdens. "Make them gather their own straw. Let them make the same number of bricks. No rest for them." The Hebrew elders cried out to Moses in despair. "You have made us stink in Pharaoh's eyes. You have brought us nothing but trouble." Moses turned to the heavens, broken. "Lord, why did you send me? Why bring trouble upon this people?" But the answer was not silence, it was a promise. God said to Moses, "Now you will see what I will do to Pharaoh. With a mighty hand he will let them go. I will bring my people out." The Lord then revealed his name again, a deeper revelation. "I am the Lord. I appeared to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But by my name, the Lord, I did not fully make myself known to them. I have heard the groaning of the Israelites. I will rescue them with an outstretched arm. I will take you as my people, and I will be your God." This was no longer just a mission. It was a covenant. A divine rescue plan set in motion. Moses and Aaron returned to Pharaoh again and again. Each time they warned him, and each time Pharaoh hardened his heart. Then came the signs. Water turned to blood. Frogs swarmed the land. Gnats filled the air. Flies tormented the people. Livestock died. Boils erupted. Hail destroyed crops. Locusts devoured all that was green. Darkness swallowed the land for 3 days. Yet still Pharaoh's heart remained like stone. Each plague was not just a punishment, it was a divine confrontation. Every blow targeted the so-called gods of Egypt. The Nile, sacred to their worship, turned to blood. The frog goddess Hecate, silenced by the infestation. Ra, god of the sun, blotted out by darkness. It was as if the Lord was saying, "There is none beside me." But the final plague would be different. It would strike at the heart of Egypt, its future. God told Moses, "I will bring one more plague upon Pharaoh. After that he will let you go." Every firstborn in Egypt would die, from the palace to the prison. But God gave his people a way to be spared. A lamb without blemish was to be slain. Its blood was to be placed on the doorposts. "When I see the blood, I will pass over you." This became the first Passover, a shadow of a greater redemption to come. That night, death swept through Egypt. Cries of grief rose from every household, except the ones marked by blood. Have you already clicked on the like button and subscribed to the channel? This helps us understand that you are enjoying our videos and YouTube is sending you more. We count on your help. Let's go back to the video. Pharaoh's resistance finally shattered. In the dead of night, he summoned Moses. "Leave," he said. "Go worship your God. Take your people. Take your flocks. And bless me also." The Exodus had begun. The children of Israel left in haste, carrying the treasures of Egypt and the bones of Joseph. A nation of slaves was now a people set free. But Pharaoh's heart turned once more. Regret poisoned his soul. "What have we done? We have let them go." He summoned his army, horses, chariots, warriors, and chased after Israel. At the edge of the Red Sea, Israel was trapped. Mountains on one side, water on the other. Pharaoh's army closing in. The people cried out in terror. But Moses stood firm and declared, "Do not be afraid. Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord." Then he stretched out his staff over the sea, and God parted the waters. A path of dry ground split the waters. Israel walked through with walls of water to their left and right. Pharaoh's army pursued, but God was not done. As the last Israelite crossed, Moses raised his staff once more. The waters crashed back, drowning the might of Egypt. Not a single chariot remained. Israel looked back and saw their enemies no more. On the other side of the sea they sang, "The Lord is my strength and my song. He has become my salvation." Pharaoh's chariots and his army he has hurled into the sea. It was not just a song of victory. It was a declaration of identity. God had not only saved them, he had claimed them as his own. But the journey was far from over. The wilderness awaited. There God would teach his people who he was. There he would shape slaves into sons, rebels into worshipers, wanderers into a nation. For 40 years they wandered, fed by manna from heaven, guided by a pillar of cloud by day and fire by night. They grumbled, they doubted, they rebelled. but God remained faithful. On Mount Sinai he gave them his law. You shall have no other gods before me. A holy covenant was forged, written not just on tablets of stone, but meant for hearts of flesh. He taught them how to live, how to worship, how to be his. The Exodus was more than an escape, it was a revelation. That God was not distant. That he hears the cries of the oppressed. That he remembers his promises. That he delivers by power and by purpose. And that no empire, no Pharaoh, no Red Sea can stand against his will. The story of Moses and the Exodus echoes still, because the God who delivered then is the same today. Still calling, still freeing, still leading his people from bondage to promise. The silence of Pharaoh's hall was cut by a defiant laugh. Who is this Lord that I should obey him? He scoffed. The very idea of yielding to a God he did not know seemed absurd. Pharaoh's pride was as tall as Egypt's monuments, unyielding. His response was brutal. If the Hebrews had time to talk of freedom, they weren't working hard enough. From that moment, straw would no longer be given for their bricks, yet the quota remained unchanged. Panic and despair swept through Israel like a storm. The cries of the overseers echoed with the crack of whips. The people turned on Moses in pain. You promised deliverance, but now our suffering has only worsened. Moses, burdened with sorrow, cried out to God. And in that holy silence, a promise was forged. Now you will see, said the Lord, what I will do to Pharaoh. With a mighty hand I will compel him. I am the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I will bring my people out. With divine authority, signs, and wonders in hand, Moses returned to Pharaoh, but this time he was not alone. Beside him stood Aaron, and the power of God stood with them. As they entered the throne room, Aaron lifted his voice with boldness. Thus says the Lord, let my people go. Pharaoh remained unmoved, arms crossed in arrogance. But then Aaron threw down his staff, and it became a serpent. The court recoiled, astonished. But Pharaoh smirked, and at his signal, the magicians of Egypt mimicked the act. Their rods became serpents, but Aaron's serpent devoured them all. A hush fell. Even Pharaoh's sorcerers stepped back in fear. But Pharaoh, blind in pride, dismissed it all as sorcery. Israel will not go, he declared. And so, God's judgment began, not with words but with signs. The first plague struck. At the river Nile, the source of Egypt's life and pride, Moses raised his staff. The water turned to blood, fish floated lifeless, the air reeked of decay. Egypt's life source became death. Yet Pharaoh remained defiant, for his magicians mimicked the act. His heart, already hardened, turned colder still. Then came frogs, swarms rising from every stream and river, leaping through palaces, beds, and ovens. Egypt became a nation crawling with torment. Pharaoh relented, momentarily. Pray to your God, he pleaded. Moses did, and the frogs died. But when relief came, Pharaoh's heart calcified again. Then dust was struck and it became lice. They crawled on every body, beast, and garment. Egypt scratched in agony. This time, Pharaoh's magicians failed. One turned pale and whispered, "This is the finger of God." But even then Pharaoh would not yield. Next, a thick haze swarmed the land, flies in mouths and eyes in every breath. But in Goshen where Israel dwelled, not a single fly stirred. Pharaoh called for Moses, offering partial freedom. Worship your God, but don't leave Egypt. Moses refused. Flies vanished at his prayer, yet Pharaoh again broke his word. Then the livestock died, oxen, sheep, camels, all of Egypt's wealth fell dead. Yet not one beast in Israel perished. Still, Pharaoh clung to his rebellion, watching his nation decay before him. Boils came next. Moses threw soot into the air, and it spread like a curse, blistering boils covering every Egyptian. Their magicians could no longer stand before Moses. Their pride melted into sores, but Pharaoh's heart stayed stone. Then came hail. Not ordinary hail, fire mingled with ice. Trees shattered, crops vanished, beasts and men struck down in the fields. Pharaoh trembled, his voice cracking. "I have sinned," he said. "Pray for me." Moses did, and the storm ceased. But with skies clear, Pharaoh's vow dissolved. Then locusts came like a devouring army, eating what the hail had left. The land disappeared under wings. Desperate, Pharaoh begged again. Moses prayed, and a divine wind swept them away. Yet again the king lied. And so darkness. Not just the absence of light, but a darkness that could be felt. For 3 days Egypt groped in blindness. But Israel had light. Pharaoh, weary and broken, offered another compromise. "Go, but leave your livestock." Moses said no. "You shall never see my face again." Pharaoh shouted. "So be it," Moses replied. "You will not see me again." And then came the final plague, the night Egypt would never forget. God spoke, and the instructions for salvation were given. Each Israelite family was to take a spotless lamb, slaughter it, and paint its blood on the doorposts. That night, judgment would pass through Egypt, but the blood would be a sign. In every home covered by the blood, death would not enter. The people ate in haste, sandals on, staffs in hand, ready for freedom. Then at midnight it happened. Death swept through Egypt. From Pharaoh's palace to the poorest shack, the cry of grief rose. Every firstborn, man and beast, was gone. The silence of the night shattered by a nation's scream. Pharaoh's own son lay still. Broken, Pharaoh called for Moses and Aaron. "Go," he said, his voice hollow, "leave us. Take everything. But pray for me too." After 430 years in bondage, the children of Israel were finally free. Chains broken, curses lifted, cries answered. Egypt had been brought to its knees, not by a sword but by a sovereign hand. As dawn broke, Israel began to march. Men, women, children, families that had known nothing but slavery, now walked with heads lifted. They carried their belongings, their animals, and the wealth of Egypt, freely given. Egypt no longer resisted. Egypt wanted to forget. Egypt feared the God of Israel. But even as they stepped into freedom, the story was not finished. For though Egypt had been judged, one final confrontation loomed. A battle not of blades but of faith. Pharaoh's heart, though crushed, would rise once more in wrath. But for now Israel was a free nation. A people marked not by bondage but by the blood of the Lamb. A people led not by Moses alone, but by the fire and presence of the Almighty. And the world would remember this exodus, not as a tale of rebellion but as a revelation of divine power. What Pharaoh mocked he now feared. What the magicians mimicked they now revered. And what began with brick and straw, ended with a miracle written in eternity's scroll. The Lord had delivered his people, and Egypt would never be the same. Moses stood with unwavering faith, a steady voice among trembling hearts. The cries of fear echoed across the crowd, accusations, doubts, panic. But Moses, grounded in God's promise, raised his voice not in fear, but in declaration, "Stand still and see the salvation of the Lord." In that moment the impossible unfolded. God commanded and Moses obeyed. The sea split, not by might, not by magic, but by divine command. The wind howled like a warrior's cry as two towering walls of water rose, revealing a path where there was none. On dry ground they walked, not running from Egypt, but walking into destiny. Children stepped forward in wonder, elders with tears marking freedom with every step. Behind them the oppressors followed, chariots and swords driven by pride and fury. But God's timing is perfect. The sea that opened in mercy now moved in judgment. The waters returned, erasing Egypt's power in a moment. Israel saw the bodies of their enemies washed ashore. And with that sight they believed, not in Moses but in the God who fought for them. Victory gave birth to worship. The people broke into song, raw, unfiltered praise. Miriam led the women in dance. The echo of tambourines filled the air. This was not just a military win. It was a spiritual rebirth. Slaves became singers. Survivors became worshipers. But freedom was never meant to be the destination. It was the beginning. God led them not just out of bondage but toward himself. The journey pointed toward a greater promise, a covenant relationship. 3 months later, the foot of Mount Sinai became sacred ground. Thunder cracked the sky, lightning lit up the heavens, and a thick cloud veiled the mountain. The sound of a divine trumpet shook every heart. The people trembled. They had seen miracles, but now they were about to hear the voice of God. His voice was not just a sound, it was a shaking, living reality. "I am the Lord your God," he said, not just to a nation but to each heart. The 10 Commandments were more than rules, they were an invitation to a new identity. But the weight of God's voice was too much. The people pulled back in fear. They begged Moses, "You speak to him, not us." They wanted distance from the divine. But God's purpose was nearness. Still he respected their fear. Through Moses he gave his covenant, a law not to enslave but to shape a holy nation. Yet even as God's fire lingered on the mountain, something darker stirred below. While Moses was with God for 40 days, receiving the sacred tablets, the people's faith unraveled. They asked Aaron for a new god. Gold was melted, shaped into a calf, and declared divine. Celebration erupted, but it was hollow. The same people who sang of God's deliverance now danced around an idol. God's heart was grieved. He offered to start over with Moses. But Moses pleaded for mercy, not judgment. He reminded God of his promises, and once again intercession spared a nation. But sin has a price. Moses descended with fire in his eyes and brokenness in his hands. The tablets shattered, a symbol of the covenant they had already broken. The golden calf was destroyed, turned to dust, mixed into water, and forced down the throats of the idolaters. It was a bitter reminder of how quickly the human heart forgets. Judgment came swiftly, 3,000 died that day. But even then, grace whispered. Moses climbed the mountain again, not just as a leader but as a mediator. He asked not just for forgiveness but for revelation. "Show me your glory," he pleaded. And God answered, not with his face but with his goodness. A second set of tablets was given. The covenant was renewed. The mountain, once covered in wrath, now radiated glory. Moses came down changed, his face shining with the reflection of divine presence. The people saw it. They knew they were not just freed slaves, they were a holy nation. But holiness is not a title. It is a journey. And the journey was far from over. God's presence was not limited to thunder and cloud. He longed to dwell among them in their midst, day and night. Have you already clicked on the like button and subscribed to the channel? This helps us understand that you are enjoying our videos and YouTube is sending you more. We count on your help. Let's go back to the video. And so, God gave the blueprint for his tabernacle, a moving sanctuary, a visible symbol of invisible presence. Every instruction, from golden hooks to embroidered curtains, was divine. The people responded with generosity. The artisans crafted with excellence. It wasn't just construction, it was worship. When the final thread was woven, when the ark was set in place, God moved in. A cloud filled the sanctuary so thick even Moses couldn't enter. Fire hovered by night. Cloud covered by day. When it lifted, they moved. When it settled, they stayed. God led his people personally, visibly. But even as the tabernacle stood in glory, the hearts of Israel remained fragile. Rebellion was still a shadow within them. Their greatest test loomed ahead. For while God had brought them out of Egypt, Egypt still lived in their minds, their memories, their instincts. And the wilderness would reveal the true distance between freedom from oppression and freedom within the heart. In the heart of the wilderness, a moment of divine reckoning descended. The people of Israel, standing on the verge of promise, instead chose fear over faith. "If the Lord delights in us, he will give us this land," Caleb cried. "Do not rebel against him." But their hearts were hardened. They threatened to stone him. And right then, God's glory fell. A voice thundered from the heavens, echoing grief and judgment. "How long will this people despise me? They've seen my glory. They've witnessed my signs. Yet still they do not trust me." With a voice of finality, the Lord declared, "They will not enter the land." A divine line had been drawn. Their generation would perish in the wilderness, and their children, only their children, would inherit the promise. The camp erupted in sorrow. Moses fell to his knees. But it was too late. Judgment had been spoken. Destiny would be delayed but not denied. Time passed, but rebellion remained. In the desert's harsh silence, a man named Korah dared to challenge Moses. He gathered 250 respected leaders and declared, "Who made you ruler? We are all holy. Why do you exalt yourself?" Again, Moses fell to the ground in humility. Then came the divine response. God said, "Tomorrow I will show who is truly mine." The next morning, Korah and his followers stood before the tabernacle, fire pans in hand. A crowd watched, breath held. Moses made a solemn proclamation. "If these men die like all others, the Lord has not sent me. But if the earth opens and swallows them alive, then know, they have defied God." And in that moment the ground split. The earth opened. Fire consumed. Terror swept through Israel. The people fled and silence fell over the ashes. It was a warning that would echo for generations. God does not tolerate rebellion. 40 long years dragged across the sands of the wilderness. An entire generation faded like footprints in the dust. Their memories of Egypt became stories, distant and vague. A new generation rose, one raised on manna and miracles, on cloud and fire, on water from rocks and words from heaven. Finally, they stood at the threshold of the promised land. But before they could cross the Jordan, one last message remained. Moses, now aged and weary, summoned all of Israel. Thousands gathered, their hearts pounding with expectation. He looked over them, not with the eyes of a leader but of a father. And then he spoke, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. Love him with all your heart, all your soul, and all your strength." These were not mere commands. They were identity. Purpose, legacy. Teach them to your children. Talk about them day and night. Bind them to your hands. Write them on your doors. This was the covenant, not just for a moment but for all time. But before we continue, I will leave below a link to one of our ebooks to improve your relationship with God and help you begin to understand the reason for certain things and trust Him more. But Moses knew his time had ended. God had spoken plainly, "You will not cross the Jordan. Climb Mount Nebo. See the land. But you will not enter." Moses had led them through plagues and Red Seas, through sin and sanctification. He had spoken with God face to face. But the journey was bigger than one man. It needed a new leader, one born for conquest, for courage, for battle. His name was Joshua. Before all the people, Moses placed his hands upon him. "Be strong. Be courageous. The Lord will go before you. He will not leave you." And with that blessing, Moses turned, walking alone toward the mountain. Wind whispered across the summit. From its peak he saw it all: Jericho, the Jordan, the hills of Canaan, the land promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And then, in the solitude of divine presence, Moses breathed his last. God Himself buried him. No grave was marked, no stone engraved, but his name would echo forever. Israel mourned. 30 days of weeping for the one who led them through fire and famine. But then Joshua rose, sword in hand, eyes fixed on destiny. And God spoke again, "My servant Moses is dead. Now arise, cross the Jordan. The land I promised is now yours. Be strong and courageous, for as I was with Moses, so I will be with you." The story of Moses had ended, but the story of Israel was just beginning. The law he delivered, the covenant he carried, it lived on. For never again would Israel have a prophet like Moses, a man who knew God face to face. And so this chapter closes not with defeat but with legacy. The journey from Egypt to Canaan was more than history. It was transformation, liberation, faith written in fire. And to all who still wander, who still wait for promise, this story speaks. Trust the one who leads. For the same God who parted seas still parts hearts, and still calls us home.